The Galactic Cadet Academy floated high above the green world of Velora Prime, one of the safest planets in the known galaxy. For hundreds of years, young cadets from many different species traveled there to learn science, engineering, diplomacy, and survival. The academy was famous for its strict rules and advanced technology, but it was also known for something else. Velora Prime had almost perfect weather. The skies were usually clear, the winds were gentle, and dangerous storms were extremely rare. Because of that, many species living across the galaxy considered Velora Prime one of the most comfortable places in existence. On a calm morning, hundreds of cadets moved through the academy halls as classes prepared to begin. Some carried datapads while others discussed their assignments. Among them was a human exchange student named Yuna. She came from Earth, a planet officially listed as a Deathworld by the Galactic Council. The title always made alien students nervous whenever they heard it. To many species, Earth sounded more like a dangerous wilderness than a civilized world. Yuna did not look dangerous at all. She was a young woman with dark hair, calm eyes, and a relaxed smile. She walked through the corridors carrying her books while looking completely ordinary. Several cadets passed her and quietly moved aside. They respected humans, but they were never entirely comfortable around them. Stories about Earth were famous throughout the galaxy. Alien students often whispered about giant predators, deadly oceans, violent storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, and countless other dangers. Many wondered how humans managed to survive at all. Yuna usually ignored the rumors. She had heard them many times before. To her, Earth was simply home. That morning, she entered a weather science class taught by instructor Doran. The room was already filled with students from different worlds. Among them were Jiho, a quiet engineering cadet, Min, who loved studying starships, Hannah, one of the academy's top students, and Jisoo, who always asked questions about human life. They greeted Yuna as she sat down near the window. Outside, sunlight covered the academy grounds and everything looked peaceful. Instructor Doran began speaking about planetary weather systems and atmospheric stability. Most students listened carefully while taking notes. Suddenly, a faint warning sound echoed through the room. Everyone looked up. The academy's alarm system almost never activated. The sound stopped after a few seconds. Students exchanged confused glances. Doran frowned and checked his datapad. A moment later, another alarm sounded, louder this time. Red lights flashed across the classroom ceiling. The instructor's face immediately became serious. Every student noticed the change. "Remain calm," Doran said. "This may only be a precaution." But his voice lacked confidence. Before anyone could ask questions, emergency notifications appeared on every screen in the room. The message identified an approaching atmospheric event. The room fell silent. Doran stared at the display for several seconds before slowly reading the report. "Class 7 Hyperstorm detected," he said. Several students gasped. Others immediately turned pale. Jiho nearly dropped his datapad. Hannah looked toward the window with growing concern. Yuna noticed everyone becoming nervous and leaned forward slightly. "What's a hyperstorm?" she asked. The room became even quieter. Several cadets stared at her in disbelief. Jisoo looked shocked. "You don't know?" he asked. Yuna shook her head. Doran swallowed hard before answering. "A hyperstorm is one of the most dangerous natural events known on Velora Prime." Before he could continue, another warning message appeared. Emergency evacuation procedures were now active across the entire academy. The calm atmosphere disappeared instantly. Students rushed to gather their belongings while instructors received new instructions through their communicators. Outside the window, clouds had begun forming at an incredible speed. Dark gray masses rolled across the sky, swallowing the sunlight. Within minutes, the bright morning turned into something much darker. The academy loudspeakers activated. "Attention all personnel. Proceed immediately to designated shelter zones. This is not a drill." Panic spread through the classroom. Jiho quickly packed his things. Hannah stood and looked toward the storm outside. Min nervously checked the weather report streaming across his datapad. The predictions were becoming worse every minute. Wind speeds continued rising. Atmospheric pressure was falling rapidly. Several transport systems around the academy were already shutting down. Yuna stood beside the window and watched the approaching clouds. The scene looked dramatic, but not especially frightening. Back on Earth, she had seen storms many times. Some had looked even worse. Outside, distant flashes of lightning appeared across the horizon. Thunder rolled through the sky. A few students stepped away from the windows. One cadet whispered a prayer. Another looked close to tears. Doran quickly directed everyone toward the shelter corridors. "Move now," he ordered. "Do not stop for any reason." The students followed him into the hallway where hundreds of cadets were already rushing toward underground protection zones. Emergency lights flashed red along every wall. Security drones flew overhead while broadcasting instructions. The entire academy had transformed from a peaceful school into a facility preparing for disaster. As they moved through the crowded corridor, Yuna noticed the fear on everyone's faces. Many species around her seemed genuinely terrified. Some shook while walking. Others clutched emergency equipment tightly against their chests. She glanced through a nearby observation window and saw the storm drawing closer. Massive cloud formations twisted high above the planet. Bright lightning flashed repeatedly inside them. The wind was becoming stronger. Trees outside bent sharply under the pressure. Yuna studied the scene for a moment before speaking. "Honestly," she said, "it looks kind of nice." The reaction was immediate. Several cadets stopped walking. Jiho stared at her. Hannah blinked twice. Min looked convinced he had heard something wrong. "Nice," Jisoo repeated. Yuna nodded. "Yeah, the clouds look impressive." Nobody knew how to respond. Around them, alarms continued sounding and emergency personnel hurried through the hallways. Yet the human exchange student seemed more interested in admiring the weather than escaping from it. Jiho finally shook his head. "Humans are unbelievable," he muttered. They continued moving until they reached one of the academy's underground shelter sectors. Huge reinforced doors sealed behind them. Thousands of cadets gathered inside the protected chambers. Large display screens showed live weather updates from satellites and monitoring stations. The situation continued worsening. Scientists reported that the hyperstorm was growing faster than expected. Winds had already reached dangerous levels. Several atmospheric monitoring towers had gone offline. More disturbing reports followed. The storm was now projected to become one of the strongest ever recorded on Velora Prime. Nervous conversations filled the shelter. Students watched the screens with fear. Some worried about their families. Others feared damage to the academy itself. Yuna sat quietly with Jiho, Hannah, Min, and Jisoo while observing the updates. Unlike everyone around her, she remained completely calm. Hours later, the storm finally reached the academy. The shelter trembled slightly as powerful winds struck the structure. Thunder boomed overhead like distant explosions. Emergency lights flickered. On the large screens, cameras showed rain falling in heavy sheets across the academy grounds. Lightning flashed almost constantly. The storm certainly looked powerful, but Yuna still did not appear concerned. She watched the display for several minutes before smiling slightly. "The weather forecast back home once predicted something similar," she said casually. Her friends turned toward her in disbelief. Outside, one of the strongest storms in the planet's history was beginning. Yet the human girl sounded as though she were discussing a normal weekend. Around the shelter, frightened cadets continued watching the screens, while emergency alerts updated every few minutes. None of them realized that this strange difference between human and alien perspectives was only the beginning. Before the storm ended, the entire academy would learn exactly why Earth was called a death world, and why a human student could look at a disaster that terrified an entire planet and calmly describe it as nice weather. Part 2. The shelter remained crowded as the hyperstorm raged above the academy, and although the reinforced walls protected everyone inside, the sound of the storm could still be heard. Deep thunder rolled through the structure like distant explosions while powerful winds struck the academy buildings over and over again. Large screens displayed live camera feeds from different parts of the campus, showing rain falling sideways and lightning flashing so often that the sky rarely became dark. Most cadets watched the screens with nervous faces. Some quietly discussed evacuation plans if the academy suffered major damage. Others simply sat in silence, hoping the storm would pass soon. Yet in the middle of all that fear, Yuna seemed almost relaxed. She sat beside Jiho, Hana, Min, and Jisoo while watching the storm coverage with mild interest. The difference between her reaction and everyone else's became impossible to ignore. Finally, Jisoo leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Yuna, are humans really not afraid of weather like this?" he asked. Several nearby cadets immediately listened. The question had been on everyone's mind for hours. Yuna looked at the screen showing sheets of rain sweeping across the academy grounds. "Afraid? Sometimes," she answered honestly. "But storms happen all the time on Earth. Most people learn how to deal with them when they're young." The nearby cadets exchanged confused looks. Hannah frowned. "You mean storms stronger than this?" she asked. Yuna nodded. "Of course." The shelter suddenly became very quiet. Several students stopped their conversations and turned toward her. Even people sitting a few rows away began listening. One cadet looked completely shocked. "Stronger than this?" he repeated. "This is a Class 7 hyperstorm." Yuna shrugged. "Back home, I've seen hurricanes, typhoons, blizzards, dust storms, and tornadoes. Some places get earthquakes too. My hometown had flood warnings almost every year." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Jiho stared at her as if she had just described life on a nightmare planet. The more Yuna talked, the more unbelievable Earth sounded. Many cadets already knew Earth was classified as a death world, but hearing details from an actual human made the stories feel real for the first time. As the storm continued outside, conversations throughout the shelter slowly shifted toward Earth. Students who had never spoken to Yuna before began approaching her with questions. One cadet asked if humans really lived near active volcanoes. Another asked about giant predators. Someone else wanted to know if Earth oceans actually contained creatures large enough to swallow vehicles. Yuna answered each question casually. She explained that many people lived near volcanoes because the land was fertile. She described sharks, bears, wolves, crocodiles, and countless other predators. She mentioned poisonous animals, dangerous insects, and severe weather events, as if she were discussing ordinary facts from a textbook. The aliens listened with growing disbelief. To them, Earth sounded less like a civilized planet and more like a giant survival challenge. Min finally shook his head. "No wonder humans have such a reputation," he said. Yuna laughed softly. "Honestly, most humans think Earth is normal." That answer somehow made everything even worse. Hannah rubbed her forehead. "Normal?" she asked. "Nothing you described sounds normal." Several cadets immediately agreed. Yuna smiled but did not argue. She had learned long ago that many species viewed Earth very differently than humans did. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Every answer created even more questions. By the end, many cadets looked at Yuna with a mixture of curiosity and respect. She was no longer simply another student. She had become a living example of what kind of environment could produce humans. Meanwhile, the storm outside continued growing stronger. Emergency updates appeared across the shelter displays every few minutes. Wind speeds exceeded previous records. Several weather monitoring stations had completely failed. Communication with some areas of the academy had become unstable. The situation worried instructors more than they wanted to admit. Instructor Doran stood near a command terminal speaking with emergency personnel. His expression became increasingly serious with every report he received. Yuna noticed this immediately. While most students focused on the storm itself, she focused on the people managing it. She could tell something was wrong. Jiho noticed as well. "The instructors don't look confident anymore," he said quietly. Hannah nodded. "I think the storm is stronger than they expected." Their concern proved correct. A short time later, a new announcement echoed through the shelter. "Attention all personnel. Portions of the academy have suffered structural damage. Remain in designated shelter zones until further notice. Nervous whispers spread throughout the room. Some cadets looked frightened again. Others checked messages from friends located in different shelter sectors. The academy had prepared for storms before, but this situation was clearly becoming more serious than anyone expected. Outside, lightning struck a communications tower visible on one of the camera feeds. The structure disappeared in a shower of sparks before the transmission abruptly ended. Several cadets gasped. Jisoo looked at Yuna. "Does that still seem like nice weather?" he asked. Yuna watched the damaged tower for a moment. "Okay," she admitted. "It's getting a little rough now." That answer somehow reassured everyone nearby. If the human finally considered the storm rough, then perhaps their fear was justified. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of weakening. Rain continued hammering the academy. Winds screamed across the campus. Emergency crews remained on standby while engineers monitored every system they could. Despite the danger, curiosity about Earth continued spreading through the shelter. New groups of cadets kept approaching Yuna. Some asked about human survival skills. Others wanted to know how humans handled dangerous environments. Yuna explained emergency shelters, weather alerts, evacuation plans, disaster drills, and rescue operations. She described how schools practiced emergency procedures from an early age. She explained that many families kept supplies ready for storms and other disasters. The alien students listened carefully. For many of them, such preparation sounded extreme. Their worlds rarely faced serious environmental threats. Earth suddenly seemed less like a planet and more like a training ground. Jiho found himself thinking about something Instructor Doran once taught during a survival class. Difficult environments often create strong adaptations. Looking at Yuna, he finally understood what that lesson meant. Humans did not survive because Earth was safe. They survived because Earth was dangerous. Another powerful tremor shook the shelter. Several lights flickered. The crowd immediately became tense. Emergency workers moved quickly through the room checking systems. A moment later, one of the large display screens changed to a live weather map. The Hyperstorm now covered a massive section of Velora Prime. Red warning zones spread across the map like wildfire. The forecast models showed no immediate improvement. Some predictions even suggested the storm could intensify further. Instructor Doran stepped forward and addressed the shelter. He tried to remain calm, but everyone could hear the concern in his voice. "All cadets remain where you are. Emergency teams are working to stabilize affected areas. There is no immediate danger to this shelter." His words helped, but only slightly. People were still worried. Yuna looked around the room. Fear filled the faces of many students. Some stared at the floor. Others watched the screens as though expecting disaster at any moment. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Yuna realized how different life was for most species. Many had never experienced conditions like these. What humans considered challenging weather felt like the end of the world to them. That realization changed how she viewed the situation. Instead of being amused by their reactions, she began understanding them. Late in the evening, another emergency report arrived. This one immediately caught the attention of academy staff. Several instructors rushed toward command terminals. Security personnel began moving through the shelter with unusual urgency. Jiho noticed first. "Something happened," he said. Everyone looked toward the command area. Doran's face had gone pale. He exchanged messages with multiple departments before quickly leaving the room. The atmosphere inside the shelter changed again. Students whispered nervously. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed the situation was worsening. Yuna watched the activity carefully. Her instincts told her the academy was facing more than damaged buildings and power failures. Somewhere beyond the shelter walls, a larger problem was beginning to unfold. Outside, the Hyperstorm continued roaring across Velora Prime, stronger and more dangerous than ever. And although most cadets believed the worst part of the disaster was already happening, they were wrong. The true crisis had not yet begun, and before the storm was over, the entire academy would discover that surviving harsh weather was only one of the many lessons Earth had taught its people. Part 3. The uneasy feeling inside the shelter continued to grow as Academy staff moved quickly between command stations, exchanging reports that sounded more serious with every passing minute. The Hyperstorm still pounded Velora Prime without mercy, and although the reinforced shelter remained secure, everyone could feel that something beyond the weather itself had gone wrong. Yuna watched Instructor Doran return to the command area with several senior officers. Their faces were tense, and none of them looked relieved. Jiho noticed it too. Hana and Jisoo exchanged worried glances while Min quietly listened to nearby conversations. Before long, the shelter loudspeakers activated again. This time the voice sounded less calm than before. Attention all personnel. Several Academy sectors have experienced critical system failures. Emergency teams are assessing the situation. Please remain in shelter zones. The announcement ended abruptly. Nervous whispers immediately spread through the room. Critical system failures sounded much worse than damaged buildings. Yuna stood and walked closer to one of the large display screens. A weather map remained visible, but another window had appeared beside it. The Academy's engineering network showed multiple red warning symbols scattered across the campus. Some areas had completely lost power. Others were suffering communication outages. One section near the edge of the Academy flashed with a bright emergency marker. Jiho stepped beside her. "That doesn't look good," he said. Yuna nodded. "No, it doesn't." A few minutes later, Instructor Doran approached a group of senior cadets and quietly began discussing options. Yuna could not hear every word, but she caught enough to understand the situation. One of the Academy's atmospheric control stations had suffered major damage during the storm. The station helped regulate pressure systems around several Academy sectors. If repairs were not made soon, entire sections of the campus could become unsafe. The problem became even worse when another report arrived. A maintenance crew sent to inspect the station had become trapped inside after structural damage blocked their escape route. Several emergency workers were now stranded directly in the middle of the storm. The news spread quickly through the shelter. Fear returned stronger than before. The trapped workers were located far outside the protected zones, where wind speeds had reached dangerous levels. Rescue teams had already considered sending help, but conditions outside were becoming increasingly impossible. Every forecast predicted that anyone attempting a rescue would face severe risk. The Academy's emergency commanders debated possible solutions while students watched helplessly. Hana sat down heavily. "They're trapped out there?" she asked. Jiho nodded. "And nobody can reach them." The room fell quiet again. Everyone understood what that meant. If the atmospheric station failed completely, more systems across the Academy could collapse. But sending rescuers into the storm might create even more casualties. Yuna listened carefully as updates continued arriving. Her expression slowly changed. She was no longer treating the storm as an interesting event. Real people were now in danger. On one of the display screens, a damaged camera briefly showed part of the atmospheric station. Rain slammed against the structure while debris flew through the air. Visibility was terrible. The image vanished a moment later when the camera failed. Several cadets looked away. The conditions outside seemed hopeless. Yet Yuna kept staring at the screen. Something about the situation reminded her of emergency reports she had seen back on Earth. Storms could be frightening, but humans often faced them when lives were at risk. Waiting was not always an option. Hours passed as Academy officials searched for alternatives. Rescue drones failed to reach the station because of the extreme winds. Remote repair attempts produced little success. Communication with the trapped maintenance crew became weaker and weaker. Every update made the situation more urgent. Inside the shelter, frustration began replacing fear. Students wanted to help, but there was nothing they could do. Yuna noticed that some emergency workers were quietly preparing equipment near a secured exit. She walked closer and listened. The workers were discussing possible routes to the atmospheric station. None of the options sounded safe. In fact, every plan seemed likely to fail. Jiho soon joined her. "You're thinking about something," he said. Yuna did not answer immediately. She continued watching the preparations. Finally, she spoke. How far is the station? Jiho looked surprised. Why? Just curious. A nearby emergency technician overheard the conversation. About 3 kilometers from here, he answered. Through open ground. Yuna nodded slowly. 3 kilometers was difficult under normal conditions. During a hyperstorm, it sounded almost impossible. Yet she kept calculating the problem in her head. On Earth, rescue workers often crossed dangerous terrain during hurricanes, blizzards, and floods. The risks were serious, but people still tried. Jiho suddenly understood where her thoughts were going. No, he said immediately. Don't even think about it. Yuna glanced at him. Think about what? Whatever you're thinking right now. Hannah and Jisoo soon joined them. After hearing the conversation, they looked equally concerned. You can't go out there, Hannah said. Nobody can. Yuna remained silent, but her eyes returned to the equipment near the exit. Another emergency report arrived. This one carried even worse news. The atmospheric station's backup systems were beginning to fail. If repairs were not completed soon, pressure control across several academy sectors could collapse completely. The trapped workers had also reported injuries. Time was running out. The command center grew increasingly tense. Senior officials argued over possible rescue plans, while technicians searched desperately for solutions. Finally, one commander spoke the words everyone feared. The storm had become too severe. No rescue operation could be approved until conditions improved. Unfortunately, forecasts predicted that improvement might not come for many hours. The room became silent. Everyone understood what that meant for the trapped crew. Yuna looked around the shelter. Hundreds of cadets watched helplessly. Instructors looked frustrated. Emergency workers looked exhausted. Nobody wanted to abandon the people trapped outside, but nobody knew how to reach them safely. Yuna suddenly remembered countless disaster stories from Earth. She remembered firefighters entering burning buildings, rescue teams crossing flooded towns, volunteers searching through storms after natural disasters. Humans never ignored danger, but they often accepted risk when lives were at stake. To her, that was simply normal. Yet here, everyone seemed trapped by the belief that the storm itself was unbeatable. The final push came when a weak communication signal from the maintenance crew reached the shelter. Their message was brief. Structural damage inside the station was worsening. One injured worker required immediate medical attention. The transmission ended before anyone could respond. Several people lowered their heads. The atmosphere inside the shelter felt heavy. Then Yuna took a deep breath and stepped toward the command area. Jiho immediately followed. Yuna, stop. She kept walking. Hannah, Min, and Jisoo hurried after her. By the time she reached the command station, several officers were reviewing emergency data. They looked surprised when a cadet approached. Sir, Yuna said calmly, addressing Instructor Doran. I want to volunteer. The entire command area froze. Doran stared at her. Volunteer for what? Yuna pointed toward the damaged atmospheric station displayed on the screen. The rescue mission. Silence followed. Several officers looked at one another, certain they had misunderstood. Doran slowly shook his head. Absolutely not. Why? Yuna asked. Because it's suicide. Yuna glanced at the storm data. Maybe, maybe not. The officers exchanged stunned looks. Jiho nearly covered his face with his hands. Hannah looked horrified. Min seemed unable to believe what he was hearing. Jisoo simply stared at Yuna in shock. Yet despite everyone's reaction, Yuna remained calm. To her, the problem was simple. People were trapped. Time was running out. Someone needed to help them. The storm was dangerous, but danger alone had never stopped humans before. Doran firmly refused her request and ordered her back to the cadet section of the shelter. Yuna obeyed, but everyone who knew her could see that she had not changed her mind. As another wave of thunder shook the academy and emergency warnings flashed across the displays, a single thought continued growing in her mind. If nobody else could reach the trapped workers, then she would find a way herself. And outside, beyond the shelter walls, the raging hyperstorm continued waiting for anyone brave, or crazy enough to challenge it. Part 4. The storm continued hammering Velora Prime with relentless force while tension filled every corner of the Academy shelter. After Yuna volunteered for the rescue mission and was refused by Instructor Doran, most people assumed the discussion was over. Yet those who knew her well could see something different in her eyes. She was not the type of person who easily walked away when lives were in danger. Jiho, Hannah, Min, and Jisoo remained close to her as emergency workers continued monitoring the worsening situation outside. Reports from the atmospheric control station became more alarming with each passing minute. The trapped maintenance crew had lost most of their power. Their emergency medical supplies were running low, and structural damage inside the facility was spreading. Communication signals faded in and out, making it difficult to determine their exact condition. Every update increased the pressure on Academy officials. Several rescue proposals were discussed, but each was rejected because the Hyperstorm remained too powerful. Wind speeds had reached levels that could throw vehicles across open ground. Lightning strikes were occurring almost constantly. Flying debris filled the air. To nearly everyone in the shelter, the storm looked impossible to challenge. But Yuna saw something else. She saw a problem that still had a solution. While others focused on how dangerous the storm was, she focused on the people trapped inside the station. Finally, after another desperate distress signal arrived from the maintenance crew, Yuna quietly stood from her seat. Jiho immediately noticed. "What are you doing?" he asked. Yuna looked toward one of the emergency preparation areas near a secured exit. "Helping." Jiho's eyes widened. "No, absolutely not." Hannah quickly stepped in front of her. "Yuna, don't do this." Min and Jisoo joined them, both looking worried. Yuna appreciated their concern, but her decision had already been made. "If we wait much longer, those people may not survive," she said calmly. "Someone has to go." None of her friends could argue with that. The problem was that nobody believed a single cadet could succeed where trained rescue teams refused to try. Yuna approached the command area once more. This time she carried a detailed route map she had downloaded from the Academy network. Instructor Doran looked exhausted as he reviewed emergency reports. When he saw Yuna again, he immediately understood what was happening. "No," he said before she could speak. Yuna placed the map on the table. "Listen to me for 1 minute." Doran hesitated. Several officers gathered around. Yuna pointed to maintenance tunnels, service corridors, and partially sheltered routes leading toward the atmospheric station. She explained how she could avoid the most dangerous open areas. She identified backup equipment caches along the route. She showed emergency access points that would allow her to move through damaged sectors. The officers listened despite themselves. Her plan was risky, but it was not reckless. In fact, it was surprisingly detailed. Doran remained unconvinced. "Even if you reach the station, how do you get back?" he asked. Yuna shrugged slightly. "I'll figure that out when I get there." Several officers looked horrified by that answer. Yet a few exchanged thoughtful glances. Time was running out. Every other rescue option had already failed. The trapped workers could not wait forever. Finally, one commander quietly admitted the truth. "We are out of alternatives." The room became silent. Doran closed his eyes for a moment. He hated the idea. Every instinct told him it was a terrible plan. But every report from the station made the situation more desperate. At last, he opened his eyes and looked at Yuna. "If you do this, you follow every instruction from mission control. The moment conditions become impossible, you turn back." Yuna smiled slightly. "Understood." Jiho nearly fell out of his chair. Hannah stared in disbelief. Min looked as though he wanted to protest, while Jisoo simply shook his head. Somehow the human had convinced the Academy to let her attempt the impossible. Preparations began immediately. Emergency crews equipped Yuna with protective storm gear, communication equipment, emergency medical supplies, repair tools, and locator beacons. The suit was designed for harsh conditions, though nobody knew whether it could withstand a storm of this magnitude. As technicians checked her equipment, the entire shelter seemed focused on her. News of the volunteer rescue attempt spread quickly. Hundreds of cadets gathered near display screens to watch. Many could not believe a student was being allowed outside. Others whispered stories about humans and their strange relationship with danger. Jiho, Hannah, Min, and Jisoo stood nearby as Yuna completed final checks. Hannah grabbed her arm before she entered the airlock. "Please be careful," she said softly. For the first time since volunteering, Yuna looked serious. "I will." Jiho shook his head. "Humans are completely insane." Yuna laughed. "Probably." A few seconds later, the outer airlock door opened. The storm struck immediately. Even through the protective suit, the force of the wind was shocking. Rain slammed against her visor. Thunder exploded overhead. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. For a moment, everyone watching through the camera feed held their breath. The conditions looked worse than any simulation. Yet Yuna remained standing. She adjusted her balance and began moving forward. Inside the shelter, stunned silence filled the room. The camera mounted on her suit transmitted live images to every display screen. Cadets watched as she pushed through the storm one step at a time. Debris flew past her. Wind battered her from every direction. Rain covered the camera lens. Yet she continued advancing. "How is she still walking?" one cadet whispered. Nobody had an answer. Several kilometers away, the atmospheric station waited in the middle of the storm. Reaching it seemed impossible. Yet the small figure moving across the screen refused to stop. As Yuna traveled through damaged academy sectors, she encountered obstacle after obstacle. Fallen structures blocked pathways. Emergency barriers had collapsed. In several areas, she was forced to crawl beneath damaged supports while lightning flashed nearby. Mission Control constantly monitored her progress. More than once they suggested retreating. Each time Yuna evaluated the situation and continued forward. Her experience with severe weather helped her remain calm. She remembered storms back on Earth, emergency drills, disaster preparation lessons, and survival techniques she had learned while growing up. To her, the situation was dangerous, but not hopeless. Meanwhile, the cadets inside the shelter watched with growing amazement. The human exchange student they had teased only days earlier was now doing something none of them could imagine attempting. Hannah found herself gripping the edge of a table as she watched. Jiho could barely look at the screen. Min repeatedly checked the weather data, hoping conditions might improve. Jisoo simply stared, unable to take his eyes off the broadcast. Halfway to the station, Yuna discovered another problem. A maintenance tunnel she planned to use had partially collapsed. Large debris blocked most of the passage. Mission Control immediately ordered her to return. The alternate route would force her into an open area exposed to the worst part of the storm. Even experienced emergency workers considered that section too dangerous. Yuna studied the map and looked at the storm raging outside the tunnel entrance. Then she made her decision. Ignoring the worried voices coming through her communicator, she stepped into the open. The reaction inside the shelter was immediate. Gasps filled the room. The wind nearly knocked her down. Rain hammered against her suit. Debris flew past at frightening speeds. Yet somehow she kept moving. Step by step, meter by meter, she crossed the exposed area. Every person watching expected her to fail. Every prediction said she should fail. But the human continued advancing. At last, after what felt like an eternity, a damaged structure appeared through the storm. The atmospheric control station stood battered but still standing. Cheers erupted inside the shelter. For the first time in hours, hope returned. Yuna had actually made it. But the mission was far from over. The trapped workers were still inside. The station remained damaged. And the storm showed no signs of weakening. As Yuna approached the emergency entrance and prepared to enter the crippled facility, everyone watching realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. A single human cadet had crossed conditions that an entire academy considered impossible. Yet the most difficult part of the mission was only beginning. Part 5. As Yuna stepped through the damaged emergency entrance of the atmospheric control station, the howling wind outside was finally blocked by thick reinforced walls. But the danger was far from over. The station shook occasionally as powerful gusts struck the structure, and warning lights flashed across dark corridors filled with smoke and sparks. The communication channel between Yuna and Mission Control remained active, though the signal was weak. Everyone inside the Academy shelter watched her helmet camera feed in complete silence. Hundreds of cadets crowded around the display screens. Jiho, Hannah, Min, and Jisoo stood near the front, barely blinking as they followed every step she took. Inside the station, Yuna moved carefully through damaged hallways while calling out for the trapped workers. After several minutes, she finally heard a response. Faint voices echoed from deeper inside the facility. Following the sound, she discovered the maintenance crew trapped behind a collapsed support structure. Relief immediately spread through the Academy shelter when the workers appeared on the camera feed. They were alive, but their condition was not good. One worker had suffered a serious leg injury, another had burns from an electrical accident, and several others were exhausted after hours of fighting to keep critical systems running. The moment they saw Yuna, they looked shocked. They had expected professional rescue teams, not a human cadet. "You came alone?" one worker asked in disbelief. Yuna nodded. "Let's get you home." Even under the stress of the situation, several people watching the broadcast smiled at her answer. It sounded simple, but it immediately raised everyone's spirits. Before attempting the evacuation, Yuna examined the station's control systems. The reports had been correct. The atmospheric regulators were close to total failure. If they collapsed completely, multiple Academy sectors would suffer severe damage. Mission Control instructed her to focus only on the rescue, but after studying the equipment for several minutes, Yuna noticed something important. The problem was serious but not impossible to repair. Drawing on technical knowledge she had learned during Academy engineering courses, she began reconnecting damaged systems while speaking with station personnel. The workers helped as much as they could. What started as a rescue mission quickly became an emergency repair operation. Inside the Academy shelter, instructors and engineers watched the station diagnostics in disbelief. Slowly, one critical system after another returned online. Pressure levels stabilized. Backup regulators activated. Emergency power improved. Every successful repair reduced the danger facing the Academy. Instructor Doran stared at the data scrolling across his screen. He had expected Yuna to attempt a rescue. He had not expected her to start fixing the station as well. Jiho laughed nervously. "Of course she's repairing it too." Hannah shook her head. "I don't know whether she's brave or completely crazy." Min folded his arms. "Maybe both." Jisoo simply smiled. Around them, hundreds of cadets watched the numbers improve and began cheering each time another warning symbol disappeared from the displays. For the first time since the storm began, genuine hope filled the shelter. After nearly an hour of repairs, the station's most critical systems stabilized. They were not perfect, but they would survive until full repair crews could arrive later. The trapped workers were amazed. Several admitted they had already given up hope. Yet the human cadet standing beside them treated the entire situation like a difficult school assignment. Once the immediate danger passed, Yuna focused on evacuation. The injured workers could not travel quickly through the storm, which created a new problem. The journey back would be even harder than the trip to the station. Mission Control suggested waiting for conditions to improve. Unfortunately, forecasts still predicted many more hours of severe weather. The station remained vulnerable. Staying there carried its own risks. After discussing options, Yuna proposed a solution. Using emergency transport equipment stored inside the facility, they could move the injured workers while following a partially sheltered maintenance route she had identified earlier. It was dangerous, but it offered the best chance of success. The evacuation began shortly afterward. The injured workers were secured inside emergency transport units while the rest of the crew prepared to travel together. Outside, the Hyperstorm continued roaring across Velora Prime. Rain hammered the station walls. Lightning flashed through the darkness. Yet despite everything, the group stepped into the storm. Once again, Yuna took the lead. Through her helmet camera, the Academy watched as she guided the workers across damaged pathways, through maintenance tunnels, and around dangerous debris fields. Every few minutes she stopped to help someone struggling against the wind. She shared emergency survival techniques she had learned on Earth, teaching the workers how to move efficiently through severe weather. The alien workers listened carefully. To them, Yuna's knowledge seemed almost unbelievable. She treated the storm with respect but not fear. That attitude slowly spread to those around her. Step by step, the group advanced toward safety. Several times conditions became so severe that Mission Control ordered them to stop and seek shelter. Each time Yuna evaluated the situation and carefully chose the safest path forward. Her confidence helped everyone remain calm. Inside the academy, students who once viewed humans as reckless now began seeing something different. They saw preparation, adaptability, and determination. Humanity's strength was not that humans ignored danger. It was that they learned how to face it. Hours later, a cheer erupted throughout the shelter as the rescue group finally appeared on cameras near the academy perimeter. Against all expectations, they had made it back. Emergency teams rushed forward to receive the injured workers. Medical personnel immediately began treatment while engineers confirmed that the atmospheric station remained stable. The rescue mission had succeeded. The shelter doors opened, and exhausted workers were welcomed back by applause from hundreds of cadets and staff members. When Yuna finally removed her storm helmet, the reaction was unlike anything she had experienced before. People from dozens of species stood and applauded. Some cheered. Others simply stared in admiration. Instructor Doran approached her slowly. For a moment he seemed unsure what to say. Finally he smiled. "You disobeyed half my recommendations." Yuna smiled back. "Only half." Doran laughed despite himself. Around them, Jiho, Hannah, Min, and Jisoo hurried forward. Hannah immediately hugged Yuna. Jiho shook his head in disbelief. Min looked relieved, while Jisoo grinned from ear to ear. "You're impossible," Jiho said. "You know that." Yuna shrugged. "I've heard that before." The atmosphere inside the shelter felt completely different now. Fear had been replaced by relief. More importantly, perceptions had changed. The alien cadets no longer saw humans as strange creatures from a dangerous world. They saw them as people shaped by hardship into something remarkably resilient. Over the following days, the Hyperstorm finally weakened and moved away from Velora Prime. Damage assessments revealed that Yuna's actions had prevented a major disaster. Without the repairs at the atmospheric station, several Academy sectors might have suffered catastrophic failures. News of the rescue quickly spread beyond the Academy. Reports appeared across planetary networks. Soon the story reached neighboring systems and eventually much of the Galactic Council. One headline became especially famous. Human cadet calls historic Hyperstorm nice weather before saving trapped workers. The story spread rapidly. Some believed it was exaggerated. Others assumed it was propaganda. But the Academy had recordings proving every detail. Across the galaxy, people began discussing humans once again. Yet this time the conversation was different. The focus was not on predators, dangerous animals, or deadly environments. Instead, people talked about human adaptability. They talked about courage under pressure. They talked about a species that had learned to survive on a world where disasters were simply part of life. Months later, new students arrived at the Galactic Academy and heard the famous story almost immediately. Most assumed it had been exaggerated over time. Surely no student could have crossed a hyperstorm alone. Surely nobody could describe such a disaster as nice weather. Then one afternoon, during a smaller seasonal storm, several new cadets spotted Yuna standing near an observation window, watching rainfall across the academy grounds. One of them nervously asked whether the weather looked dangerous. Yuna studied the dark clouds for a moment before shrugging. "Not really," she said. "Actually, it's pretty nice today." The horrified expressions on the new students' faces immediately made Jiho, Hannah, Min, and Jisoo burst into laughter. And once again, everyone around them found themselves wondering what kind of incredible world could create people like humans.